Hello, and welcome to the Wild Blue Podcast, perspectives on aviation lives, lifestyles, and business.
Hello everyone, Todd Minton here with Chris Kirk for the Wild Blue Podcast, perspectives on aviation lives, lifestyles, and business. Chris, welcome today. Good to see you
Thanks,
again.
Todd.
I thought today I've been wanting to talk a little bit about what it costs to own an aircraft, what budgeting and maintenance. A lot of people, I think, are very concerned about the direct operating cost, but there's indirect operating cost. And I know from knowing you for a long time, you're very detail oriented and you keep excellent records as far as your aircraft. And I thought maybe you could add a little perspective on what it costs to actually own and operate an aircraft. You want to talk about that today?
Sure. Yeah. I think one of the things that we both have seen over the years is that people will get into an airplane and not really have much idea of what it's going to cost them to own. And then they end up having a bad ownership experience because they weren't anticipating a lot of these costs. Because, you can, especially with today's airplanes, you can get into a $250,000 airplane that, if it were still being built, might be nearly $1 million airplane. And so people have it in their minds, well, it's a $250,000 airplane or whatever that number may be. So that's kind of the way it's maintained. Well, it really is going to be maintained more like $1 million airplane. And so that's when they get to be surprised. Like you take some of the older twin Cessnas, maybe some of the older Mirages and Malibus, you can pick them up for a very reasonable price. All things considered.
Especially considering their performance and what they do for you. Yeah, it seems inexpensive to buy, but go on.
No, yeah, I agree. And so you got, you got all these extra costs, and people don't think about that. And then one of the things that, you and I talk about a lot, we talk about in the company a lot, is we want to try to keep people from having a bad ownership experience.
Yes.
And a lot of times that ownership experience is bad really because they just didn't do their own homework and they didn't find out about enough stuff, or they didn't ask the right questions, or, surely somebody else could have told them about it. But, hey, let's be real here. It always comes right down to you. You need to be the one that's asking those questions and going into the situation with your eyes wide open.
Well, that's why I was interested in talking about this topic, because I do think that this could open some people's eyes. And I'll be honest. First off, there are clearly some people, and to a degree I fit in this category, where I have a broad understanding of what it costs me to own my aircraft, but I don't track that cost down to the penny. Almost like a person owns a boat or something like that. It brings you pleasure. My aircraft is an RV-8. It's not really a classic business aircraft. Not to say that I can't and don't use it for some business, because I do, but for the most part, it's a lot more fun. A lot of our listeners, however, probably do use their aircraft for at least some business, or they may be of the mindset that they want to understand where the costs are and where how to track and develop those costs, because that's another aspect of this. We understand that a higher time engine is of less value than a lower time engine on a given aircraft, but what we may not understand is, well, how do we reach that number? That what determines that? So that's kind of where I thought we.
Well, and you're kind of at the luxury right now, this stage in life, where you've got the disposable income to be able to pay for these things as they come up. But a lot of times people aren't at that position, or like you said, if they're putting in a business, they need to be a little more accurate about tracking it. Or if they're in a partnership, they need to have a much better accounting. And so these concepts we're talking about here aren't going to be for everyone, but if you like tracking this kind of stuff, or you need to track this kind of stuff, and I always recommend that you do, especially if you're new getting into it, so that costs, they aren't a surprise when they come up.
Right.
And always overestimate in aviation. Always overestimate. It's kind of.
Oh, really?
It's kind of like the contractor that tells you it's going to be X number of dollars to do your bathroom, right? And next thing you know, it's 20% or 25% higher.
And you and I have talked about on how, like on Beach Talk, in aviation, they refer to $1,000 units, aircraft monetary units, or AMUs, rather, because everything seems to cost at least $1,000. Although that's not completely true. But I think what let's start with some fixed costs first. And you can run down some of these, or I may bring them up, but insurance and hangar too, almost, everybody has those fixed costs.
Right.
Talk about those for them.
Yeah. Well, it's just, what I do is I set aside a certain amount each month so that I know that it's there when it comes time to write the check. And it's not going to be a surprise. The hangar actually just gets billed directly to my credit card, so that one's pretty easy. But it's still got to be paid. So, with insurance rates going up, you need to really plan on it being a little more, because I think last year my insurance on my airplane was $2,700. And in my airplane, I'm probably one of the cheapest people on earth to be able to insure, but I still think it's probably going to go up 10 to 20% next year.
Yep.
So I think just looking at the numbers I wrote down here, I'm setting aside $300 a month right now for insurance.
Mm-hmm.
And that just gets set aside in the account every month, so that when the time comes, I got to write, which is next month, I got to write that check. It doesn't come as a surprise when I'm writing a $3,000 check to the insurance company.
The taxes are a little bit of a that's going to vary from person to person.
Mm-hmm.
How do you arrive? We're in Missouri. Both Chris and I live in Missouri. The business of Wild Blue Aircraft Sales is in Kansas City, Missouri. But how do you arrive at tax value on a per month basis?
Well, in Missouri, right, we have personal property taxes.
Right.
So that's going to be different. Some states don't have personal property. So that's really what I'm talking about here. And it's kind of weird here because actually I was talking to the tax lady about this the other day from our county. See, the business is incorporated in one county. The airplane is located in another. And so it's kind of, the counties tend to fight over this a little bit. Now, the county where the business is incorporated and the airplane is registered, it was that tax lady that called me, not the county where the airplane is located. And I asked her, and she says, well, they may call you too, and if they do, we'll just refund what you have to do.
Okay.
So it's I think for the county people, it's almost who can get to you first. But it's I want to say it's, I don't remember, 5% of the assessed value. The number I use is $285 a month. I set aside $285 a month for property taxes on the airplane. So however that math works out, I know in Missouri there's some legislation pending that if the airplane is over, I'm trying to remember what it is. It's she was telling me about it, and I knew that it was there. But if it meets certain criteria, there won't be any personal property tax, or it'll be vastly reduced. So, something. I guess it's pending in the legislature.
Yeah, I'll have to look into that. I did not realize that. And obviously, we have listeners from around the country, so your tax situation is going to vary. I think the point that Chris is making here, though, is you do need to consider taxes. And what we've talked about so far, insurance, hangar, and taxes, everybody kind of knows about. A couple that on the list here that are really hard, one is really hard, and that's an annual inspection.
Yep.
How do you come to that number? And I'll tell you, I'm looking at Chris's notes, and he has $368, not $367 or $369 a month. But $368.
Yeah, I think it's a round number when you look at it on the annual basis, and then you divide it by 12, and it comes out to that. I don't remember what it is, but that's probably roughly $4,500 a year that I have for annual. Now, keep in mind that's just for the base annual cost, because I know, for example, my annual this year is going to probably run me $9,000 or $10,000. So we'll talk about that in some of the hourly stuff, but that's just to cover the base annual and maybe some of the stuff that's going to get me out the door without having to do anything major to the airplane.
So is that the way you would recommend people budget it? I mean, or is it just
I do, but there's probably 100 ways to skin the cat. So if it just kind of depends. I like knowing that money has been set aside. It's just kind of, to me, it's like investing. If I set it aside every month, I never worry about it. If it's the first thing that comes out of my paycheck, I never worry about it. It comes out of whatever, it's there. So That way I know at the end of the year I've got that, probably $4,500 sitting right there. So that's going to cover the base annual, maybe some of the maintenance that goes on. Because I think the base annual rate for my plane runs around $2,500. So it gives another $2,000 in there for extra stuff. But I'm also not one to like to defer a lot of things. So,
no.
I'd want to have a little bit of extra in there.
Now, your next item is one that I don't think a lot of guys think about. But if you're going to fly your airplane IFR, and probably even if you're flying it VFR, you need to update those databases now. That's the avionics companies have got us on that. We all love our equipment, but databases are not inexpensive.
No.
To upgrade. I see you've got $45 a month.
Yeah, and it's pretty. I mean, my airplane isn't as elaborate as a lot of others are out there. I just, whatever your annual database is, I would, I'd divide that by 12 and make sure you're setting that aside. And don't forget to include. I am just realizing this, Todd. I don't even think I put it in there, but I use the Garmin Pilot app.
Right.
A lot of guys use ForeFlight, but regardless, you got to pay for those. And I don't remember what that is, but with the IFR version, the America's version that I get, I want to say it's close to, was it $200 a year or something like that?
Yeah, it depends on the version you use. Even I use ForeFlight, but yes, exactly. And which then even brings up things like flight instructor renewal or refresher if you have a CFI, or even a biennial flight review. I mean, we could go down a real rabbit hole with some of that stuff, but the database is very definitely related to the airplane.
Yep.
So now, I know, fortunately, both of us at this point don't owe any money on our airplane, but you've got a note for a note there, an aircraft note.
Well, if you got a note on the airplane, if you owe money on it, if it's got a loan, you took out a loan, you got to figure that in there too. So, just to kind of recap, we've got the 6 items here: the insurance, hangar, annual, database subscriptions, taxes, and then whatever your debt service or your note is are on your fixed monthly costs. And that's just, the airplane's not even moving.
Right.
It's just sitting there. So, and one thing I will throw on the taxes too is, some municipalities will have a registration required. You got to place those little stickers on the side of the airplane. So you got to throw that in there too.
I think my airplane used to be in Michigan, and it still has a Michigan sticker on it. So I think Michigan may be one of those states that does that. So let's move to the right-hand column. Obviously, our listeners are not able to see the column, but I could describe that Chris has written these in 2 separate columns. So the next is more the hourly, what you spend depends on how much you fly. Would that be what?
Yeah. The variable costs are very much based on how much you fly. I think, Todd, and that's really a good point. I think that I planned these numbers out at roughly 10 hours a month. So I'm flying 120 hours a year. Now, my plane was down for maintenance for 3 months earlier this year, but I'm still already at 100 hours, and I've got another month and a half to go. So I'm pretty close.
I'll tell you, that has been the airplane is really, and of course we've talked about this I think on another podcast, but you used to be in a flying club and used that airplane, but boy, the addition of your airplane to this business has been a real asset, I think, to the business.
Yeah, it's been wonderful.
So
and my wife likes it too, so hey, you can't go wrong there.
Yeah, quit bragging. So the first thing you have on this side of the ledger, so to speak, is an engine and prop reserve. And in your case, you said $38 an hour, and I know you mentioned on a 100-hour a year basis. But how does a person determine that? How much they think their propeller or engine would be on a per hour basis?
Sure. And what I did on here is there's 2 things you got to keep in mind on engine prop reserve. You got to look at your TBO. So whatever the TBO is on the engine. And then I never account or plan on the engine making it to TBO. Okay. I use 80% as a guide.
Okay.
So I'm hoping the engine makes it to 80% of TBO. And then I also prorate it for the hours the engine already has on it. So, if you are, maybe when you bought your airplane, you've got the money set aside for an engine because you got a high time engine already. This engine was fairly low time. So I set aside a little bit of money for it already, but then the rest of them I'm just prorating out. So I think that $38 an hour is based on maybe, I don't know, 12 or 1,300 hours left on the engine. So, I figured out just a general cost. I mean, you can't get too much down in the weeds here because things are going to change. At general cost for the engine and the prop overhaul, and then what I do is I just set that money aside again every month. But at the end of the year, I throw it into an index fund and I just let it sit there. And that way, I'm not tempted to touch it or anything.
Sure.
So it just sits there and hopefully grows.
Sure, that's a good idea. How about the next line you have up there is hourly maintenance. I'll explain that one.
So I know that in addition to the annual, there's going to be other things that go on, and plus there's going to be things I want to do. Honestly, I've got this padded a little bit because I wanted to be able to do some upgrades, little things like I just told you. I bought an all new LED light kit for the external lights on the airplane. So that's $2,500 right there.
2.5
AMUs. That's right. Doesn't sound so bad, does it? So I've got that number fairly high because my intent was to go into the annual this cycle with around 10 to 12 grand set aside because I knew that on this airplane being the first annual that I've had, it's going to be higher than average. So I didn't want to be surprised. I'll probably bump that number down as we see, as we look at what happens this year.
Well, and I think this is a time to stop and tell people that your airplane hadn't flown a lot for several years there prior to you buying it. So when you bought it, I think you were pretty conservative in thinking, well, I'm taking a level of chance here. You did all your due diligence, but still everybody knows that's a reputation of airplanes. If they haven't flown a lot, you can run into some things. Fortunately, so far, maybe you're underspending that a little bit, but I don't know, maybe not.
We'll see. I think a couple service bulletins I wanted to have done, and just little things that I don't like to defer a lot of stuff. Not all that's necessary, but.
So next on the list is consumables. Buy some oil and just stuff like that.
Yep.
$10 an hour, probably as good a guess as any, really.
Oil, air filters, all that little nickel and dime stuff that gets you over the year.
Sure. Upgrades is your next category. I don't know if so this is why I wanted to talk to you about this because you're thinking out in these next few areas that we're going to discuss are things that a lot of guys I don't think consider in the cost of operating their airplane. So these next few are probably the more interesting, or at least a couple of them are kind of interesting to me. Upgrades. So are you advocating putting away a little bit of money for future upgrades, or what's your thought process?
Well, you can see right there, I don't actually do that. It's a category because I'm planning on as upgrades come along, I'll just pay cash for them and just be done with them. But especially if you're in a partnership, or you've got a lot of things and your cash on hand is limited, maybe you want to set aside $25 or $50 an hour. So at the end of the year, you got like that ADSB mandate, or, if you did $50 an hour, that's a lot. But, after a couple of years, you'll have $10,000, $15,000.
Well, that's true. It'd be like a flying club doing an assessment, wouldn't it?
Yep.
Sure. Yeah.
And the same thing goes for the paint and interior.
Right. That was one I was going to get. To that I was like, that I never even really considered, and yet you're talking about budgeting a little bit of money every month to consider painting it. Now, some guys get an airplane, they know they're going to paint it in the near future because either they don't like the looks or it's rough or whatever.
Right.
But if you own an airplane for 10 or 12 years, eventually you got to start thinking about painting it. So
yeah, and it depends on what the condition is when you buy it, right? So. In both of our cases, the paint's in pretty darn good shape.
Yeah.
So I'm not currently setting anything aside for paint and interior other than, I am taking care of it. And for example, I am having a paint guy come in town and do some touch-up work next month.
Okay.
And he's giving me a quote. It's going to run me about $2,000 because I just don't like the little nicks and chips on the airplane. And the plane looks great otherwise. I want it to continue looking that way. I figure if I continue to invest in it and keep it in good shape, then when the time comes to sell, it's not like so many airplanes that we tend to see where the guys have not done anything to them, but yet they're still expecting them to sell for what they did when they first bought it.
Right. And it makes a difference. It definitely does. And the appearance, that I'll make a little side comment here, say that we do in our pictures on our website always try to show those flaws because they are there, and we want people to know when they're looking at buying an airplane that is a they need to know what they're buying. Now I tell people we want it to be what it is, not what we wished it were.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And of course fuel, that one is the obvious easy one, I think, but it's still, if you budget, if you really said, well, I can only spend, like a guy that says I can only spend so much money a year on flying due to other financial constraints, then he may have to limit the fuel burn, I guess. I never thought about that till now, but so.
Yeah. And actually, Todd, that's a good point, because that's when I did these numbers originally, just to kind of get an idea. I think roughly I'm planning on this airplane costing me, I have to do the math quickly, but I think it works out to be close to $2,000 or $3,000 a month, just based on my flying. Clearly not the cheapest way to go about it. A club or a partnership is certainly cheaper, but I totally enjoy the single ownership experience of an airplane. I go out there, my seat's in the same place, and my checklist is in the same place, and there's not crap on the floor, and stuff.
Okay,
like
let's be honest, Chris.
Here we go.
Chris is very meticulous in his maintenance of his aircraft. The next guy that purchases that aircraft sometime down the road is going to get a nice one. Well, anything else on this topic that we could address? I think that we kind of touched on some areas, and it's just something to make potential owners think. What did we leave out? Any?
There's probably 100 things you could throw in. We got cleaning on there. I do set aside some money on cleaning, mainly for cleaning products. I enjoy going out there occasionally and just cleaning the airplane on my own. But
sure, yeah.
But also, if you want to have like one of those ceramic coatings put on your plane, or a wax job, or have some serious touch-up done to the interior, that's a great way to do it. And what we could do, Todd, is I'm going to make a note of this here real quick, but we'll put this on a blog post and just show what these particular categories are that we use. And you tell me. What else are we missing there? What else would somebody want to put on there?
It's interesting because there's such a variety, as our listeners know, ways to keep your airplane. Some people have an individual hangar. Some people still tie airplanes down, or maybe in a shade port. Some people are in a community hangar at an FBO, and that's just one example of the range of what. And then never mind the fact that different parts of the country. We're fortunate to be here in the Midwest, where things are pretty low cost-wise, but for you folks that are on the East Coast or West Coast, $700-800 a month hangar rent is not uncommon.
Right.
So it's hard to specifically talk about a number for, like in your case, a Piper Saratoga ownership, or in my case, an RV8. It just, what it costs per hour to operate. So you have to do your own research, but I think that, like you're saying with the blog, we could give people some ideas on, and maybe spur some thought that they otherwise would not have had, like cleaning or something like that. People may not even consider that in their budgeting.
Yeah. It's something else that you may want to do, too. I just dawned on me. And I'd be interested to hear if anybody else has any thoughts. Give us a call or shoot us an email. The email is planes@flywildblue.com. But you may put in an amount for charity.
Sure.
Because a lot of people do things. We're big about the charity thing here. We do a lot of stuff with Challenge Air. I fly for Angel Flight, and encourage all of our customers to do the same if they're able. But maybe you set aside a little bit each time so that you have the ability to go out and do something like that once or twice a year.
Yeah, there's those pet flying, dog rescue, things of that nature. There's groups that when there's a natural disaster, hurricane, or anything like that, there's a lot of ways that you can put your airplane to use. That almost could be a whole nother topic on a separate podcast. Well, I think we've hit the highlights, though, and so, again, though, if you have any questions, give us a call, 888-773-4249, or direct number 479-2723 at Wild Blue. And hope you've enjoyed today's podcast. Chris, thanks for sharing some of your insight on what it costs and how you reach these figures on operating your aircraft.
Yeah, Todd, thank you. Thanks for putting this one together. Enjoyed it.
All right, take care.
Thanks for listening to the Wild Blue Podcast. Find us online at flywildblue.com. And don't forget to subscribe and share.